Zimbabwe Exemption Permits will end on the 30th of June this year. This means holders will have to return to Zimbabwe or stay as undocumented migrants if they don't get visas. The Helen Suzman Foundation wants the decision declared invalid, illegal and unconstitutional. The matter will be heard by a full bench of the High Court in Pretoria on Tuesday. Let's discuss this further with the Foundation's director, Nicole Fritz. Thank you so much for your time, Nicole. Perhaps just tell us why you're heading to court.
Well, the matter has been set down for hearing over the course of the next week, and that is because the HSF alleges that in making a decision to terminate the Zimbabwe Exemption Permits, which is the third of a series of special permits that have been granted to around 178,000 Zimbabwean nationals and have now existed for well over 13 years. But in making the decision to terminate without having first consulted, most specifically with Zimbabwe exemption permit holders themselves, but with the general South African population, the minister and department have acted unfairly and unreasonably, and that the decision then falls to be declared invalid and unlawful.
What do you think the consequences are if this is terminated? What do you think is going to happen?
Sorry, Heidi, I didn't hear that last question.
I'm asking you, what do you think the consequences are should you not succeed in court?
Well, I think if we don't succeed, the outcomes for Zimbabwean exemption permit holders will be dire. They will be faced with a choice of having returned to Zimbabwe, a country that they haven't known for 13 years now, essentially giving up lives that they have built here, and many of them will have children who know no other home but South Africa. So they will return to a Zimbabwe that is virtually unchanged from the country that they fled over a decade ago. They will not be able to necessarily take with them what they have built up in their lives in South Africa, or they will remain in South Africa as undocumented nationals, migrants, with all the vulnerability that attends upon such a status.
And it's going to be very difficult for them to make any means of living and, of course, contribute to our economy and to our country. I'm curious to know what you would have preferred the situation to be handled like. Would you have preferred for the minister to have engaged with organizations like yours to try and find a middle ground on this? Because this has been a conversation for some time now, and we've seen a lot of pushback, especially from the permit holders, to say, but why are we being treated like this? Because we want to legally be here and contribute and work here because we are skilled and we do contribute in some form or another.
Absolutely. And I think what must be remembered is that in order to have acquired the Zimbabwe exemption permit and its precursors, those who qualified, who were eligible, had to have abandoned any applications for alternative status in South Africa. They had to show that they could financially support themselves, and that they had to show that, and have had to show over on repeated instances that they have no criminal records. These individuals have been employed in South Africa. They have built lives, families, home for themselves. They have contributed economically to their countries. They have paid taxes. They have contributed to public service provision here in South Africa. And essentially by making a decision which renders a huge number essentially forcibly expelled or having to remain here as undocumented workers, that puts paid to what they have built up over what is now more than a decade. Our argument is that were the minister to have made a decision to terminate, and we're certainly not saying that the minister or the government can't terminate permits of this sort, but if they are going to, they have to consult with the public generally, but most specifically with those who are going to bear the burden of a negative decision, whose rights and livelihoods will be infringed. And that it is only following a process where individuals who are going to be most severely affected by government decision are fairly consulted, that a decision can be made. And in those circumstances, it's not only a case which I think is obviously of benefit, hopefully, to Zimbabwe exemption permit holders, but to all of us in South Africa, that if government is going to make decisions which negatively impact on particular groups' rights, their livelihoods, their safety and security, then it must consult first and foremost with those communities who stand at the sharp end of those decisions.
I'm just curious, Nicole, I know this might not be a fair question to you, but why do you think government has decided to terminate at the end of June? What do you think prompted this decision, given what we've just spoken about the economic contribution, the skills that are being brought into the country that are clearly needed?
Well, I can only sort of reflect what is reflected by the department, in the legal papers that we have seen, and the reasons that were given when the decision was taken. And when the decision was taken, the reasons that were provided was that the Zimbabwe exemption permit was always intended to be a temporary measure pending improvement of conditions in Zimbabwe. But we know that the special dispensation system has now endured for over 13 years and that conditions in Zimbabwe have not demonstrably improved. They also point to the DHA's limited budget and to supposedly an ability to affect South Africa's unemployment rate. But in fact, in the defense of this matter and the papers that have been provided to court, they have abandoned, the government has abandoned a suggestion that terminating the Zimbabwe exemption permit would assist in curing what is, and we certainly recognize, a catastrophic unemployment rate. But they continue to maintain that conditions in Zimbabwe have improved. Obviously, we dispute that. They insist that terminating the Zimbabwe exemption permit will alleviate pressure on the asylum system, and they also point to budget and resource constraints within the DHA. So those are the reasons that they have put up.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, and we'll just see how things unfold come Tuesday. That was Nicole Fritz from the Helen Suzman Foundation Director.